Welcome back to The Big Picture. We're still with former Chief Justice Artemio Panganiban. Sir, before we talk about nary executive privilege, just want to make a distinction. Why do you say that public discourse is okay with public interest cases, and yet in private cases you feel it's not?
Well, the rule in sub judice is that lawyers and the parties must limit their arguments within the courtroom, not outside the courtroom. Therefore, there should be no attempt to influence a decision outside of the courtroom and outside of written arguments. That is a strong rule in courts. However, when the case involves the general public, it's a case that affects the general public. The people are not all made parties, and there's no way by which they can express themselves except in commentaries. And so the rule on sub judice rule is relaxed. In the case of public interest cases? Yes, to allow those who are not in court to be able to express themselves.
Okay, because that means that we can continue talking about the Mary case, even though the Senate has filed a motion for reconsideration.
Yes, it's a public interest case, yes.
Okay, you obviously were not in favor of that. I mean, in the whole discussion we had tonight, you were saying government authority on one hand, yes, public right on the other. You will always side on public right. I think you had a rather pointed column last week, yes, where you seem to be questioning even the independence of the court.
No, I was not questioning the independence. I was just softly reminding my colleagues that this judgment will have far-reaching effect, not only now but in the future. And you know, courts and justices are not evaluated only in the present. They're evaluated in the future. 10 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, these major public interest cases will still be talked about in the same manner that we talk about cases 30 years ago, 50 years ago, particularly those that were promulgated during the Marcos years.
Like Avellana versus Executive Secretary.
Yes, that's right. You see, you even remember it. You're not even a lawyer, and you remember it.
Is that a fair comparison? Because I've heard lawyers say, "Oh, it's Avellana all over again." Now, I don't know if that's a fair comparison.
I wouldn't say that now, because I think we should give our court, our Supreme Court, an opportunity to express itself better next time in ruling on this motion for reconsideration.
But as Citizen Panganiban, yes, what was your problem with the decision?
Well, first, I thought that it reversed Senate versus Ermita.
On 464.
Yes. Second, I thought that there was a miscue with the Constitution. And third, I thought that there was a wholesale importation of American jurisprudence on executive privilege, when what should have been used were express provisions of our Constitution, not found in the American Constitution.
Such as?
Well, let me give you a little background. The executive privilege cannot be found in any word of the Constitution. It's just implied from the powers of the President. To be able to discharge her functions, she must be given a certain amount of leeway to be able to communicate with her subalterns. No? In the same manner, in the United States Constitution, there is also no provision on executive privilege, but the U.S. Supreme Court started that, and that concept was imported in the Philippines only recently. However, I think that this concept should be interpreted in relation to express provisions of our Constitution that are not found in the American Constitution.
Yes, I think you said in your column that the Senate's ability, the Congress's ability to investigate native legislation is explicit.
Yes, that's explicit in our Constitution. Also, the rule on transparency and accountability is explicit in our Constitution. It's not only explicit in our Constitution, but it is embedded in our history, in our tradition. You know, this Constitution was made after our sad experience of secrecy under the martial law regime of President Ferdinand Marcos, where even his own executive orders, which were law at that time, were secret. And they came out only when it was convenient to invoke
justify
them.
Certain actions.
That's why this Constitution says that transparency and accountability are primary rules of governance. And so I thought that executive privilege, although imported from the United States, must be interpreted, must be viewed in relation to these express provisions of our Constitution and also in relation to our constitutional history, our traditions, and the evil that these provisions in our Constitution seek to avoid.
And to undo.
Well, to
to
stop.
To some extent, it was a reaction to the past.
Yes.
So when do you think the president or the executive can legitimately invoke executive privilege?
Well, first, the rule is openness. It's transparency. It's accountability. And the exception is secrecy. Therefore, he or she who invokes secrecy must show the need for secrecy. That's the general proposition. Now, there are certain cases in in Senate versus Ermita, where it is already assumed that the privilege exists. For instance, internal deliberations of Congress, closed-door deliberation, because there's already the secrecy when they deliberate. And they're not alone. They're among themselves. So, 2, closed-door cabinet meetings. 3, internal deliberations of the Supreme Court. See, these are deliberations that where the justices or the members of Congress or the members of the cabinet are given a lot of leeway to be able to decide fairly and equitably. But all others are subject to that rule of openness and accountability and transparency.